basically, be like a solution to this problem that they have in those. This problem that they had in Europe across these three areas created basically, insolvency and distress across tiers. So in tier one, Spirit Aerospace went bankrupt. Spirit was such an important part of, Boeing and Airbus supply chain that when it went bankrupt, three countries had to get involved to basically try to rescue it. They were not able to basically, turn it around. As a last ditch effort, they basically, broke it down in two parts. They sold one part to Boeing and they sold one part to Airbus, whoever owned or basically was whatever section was relevant for both of them. But it was that part that important in the global supply chain. It's the largest tier one company globally. Letecor, one of the largest doors company, which makes basically doors for all this, Boeing planes, Airbus planes, the Dassault planes basically went through recapitalization. CTL Aerospace, all this, even basically as simple as wiring harness businesses, which are like a tier 4 player, those also started to struggle and basically started going bankrupt. And these issues basically now created an entry point for India where basically, even though they did not want to certification or it takes 4, 5, 7 years, in India, that process was basically, it shrunk because there was a need for India to, send this material in Europe, in US, because their own companies were not doing well and they were going through they were struggling. Now, after basically OEM started putting in money, government gave them, interest-free money to basically, restart business. Till today, at least, maybe their financials have turned and they are doing a little bit better than what they were doing 4 or 5 years back, but the balance sheets are still very weak. And if your industry is growing at 8-10%, if you can see from Airbus commentary, they are planning to add roughly, 10-15% kind of growth across the sector. In some categories, they are growing by 20%. But if these players are not growing, that demand has to be met by someone, right? And basically, there are not many countries or basically many regions in the world which can cater to that demand. So for example, like we discussed, in every sector, there are 4 or 5 players who basically cater to the majority of the market. So once an Indian player is able to, demonstrate capability and is able to enter that space, large kind of basically opportunity opens up where, very large kind of business can go to these players. So as we can see from this chart, when Letecor basically went out of or basically struggling, that opened doors for Dynamatic in terms of doors opportunity. When these wiring harness companies in Europe basically were not doing well, it opened doors for companies like, Sasmos, Rossel in India. When basically Spirit as a whole was not doing well, that also opened doors for players like Sansera, for Dynamatic again, to basically get entry into this ecosystem, entry with these players, where now basically customers also wanted someone to participate. And obviously in India, these companies who had created infra also wanted to basically, scale up this business. So all these basically issues created basically problems for the OEM. So this is a slide from OEM's perspective. The backlog basically went from 12,000 aircraft, 17,000 aircraft, not because basically OEMs are not able to ramp up, but the supply chain is not geared up for that ramp up, because on the demand side, industry is doing very well. But on the supply side, basically, because of the supply chain issues and labor issues, they are not able to meet the demand, and the backlog went from 12,000 to 17,000. Deliveries, which basically fell roughly 50%, is now increasing, but still has not been able to match the peak or basically outpace the peak what they achieved in 2018. The lead times have increased. So if you're a new airline who orders a plane now, basically it was 4.5 years in 2018, but now it is 7 years. This is for basically planes. For engines, it is even higher. In fact, we were discussing in office, some airlines have started to scrap 3-4 year old planes because the engines are now in such a shortage that basically engine value is more than the depreciated value of the plane. So basically they are extracting engines from this relatively newer planes and then using them in their new planes, and they're scrapping new planes. So this is one sector where, even though China was able to get a small foothold when basically their airline industry was doing very well, and that is why they had attracted all these Airbus, Boeing to come to China and set up supply chain. But basically China is no longer basically a default non-Western manufacturing, and it is because of 2 reasons. First is basically, now China has their own plane, Comet. It competes with Boeing and Airbus directly. Now, all the IP that Chinese have on basically aerostructures, on basically doors, on basically some landing gears, they're using the same IP to create value chain for Comet. And basically Boeing and Airbus won't be very happy with it because they are going to compete with them eventually. So there is huge IP and tech transfer concerns. Second is also basically some companies that were basically doing this work for Airbus or Boeing now also work with Chinese military. For example, for one of the listed companies in India, their doors were being manufactured by a Chinese entity. Now, that same Chinese entity also makes fighter jets for China. Now, in the last 2-3 years, they basically stopped Airbus from coming to China and started inspecting this plant. So they just stopped Airbus from inspecting this plants. Now, Airbus can't even enter that facility because basically China fears they can look at their military capabilities. So now Airbus is forced to look elsewhere when it comes to those doors, and they are basically moving that supply chain to other geographies. Now this cannot happen in like 6, 8, 9 months. This just takes time. So Airbus started this process of moving supply chain from China to other geographies like 3, 4 years back, and now it is gaining pace. And now that shift we can see where basically actively basically now business is coming to these players, which was basically being done by China in last 5 years back. Also 5, 7 years back, if basically Airbus was manufacturing 100 planes, a very large planes were being delivered in China, and that is why that supply chain had to go to China. But today, that is no longer the case, where basically Chinese airlines are now actively ordering this COMAC aircraft, and now India and other geographies, Asian countries are now basically becoming a very dominant part of the order book of Airbus and Boeing. So basically now Airbus and Boeing don't have a very strong incentive to go and set up something in China. That same incentives are available in India as well in terms of low labor costs, government support, some subsidies. So this now India is a attractive geography for them relatively compared to China. So what we spoke about the global, what's happening. So this slide summarizes everything. So on the demand side, there is no demand bottleneck. There's the secular passenger growth. India wants to basically now fly. India wants to travel. All these industries are doing well. Whatever new planes these airlines can procure, it will get fully utilized. That is no longer a problem. The fleet's replacement cycle is now triggered by maintenance, fuel costs. So because, as we discussed, the airlines were forced to use basically old planes. But now if the new planes are available, they will actively replace these new planes, old planes with new planes. So demand side, there's no issue. Capacity side, clearly, Western suppliers are not able to basically, cater to this demand, and that demand has to go somewhere. And basically, India is well capable to take that demand. Qualification, as we discussed, it's a 5-year qualification cycle that prevents rapid greenfield capacity. So even though if basically things do improve in Europe and things do improve in US, it will just take time for them to basically come with greenfield capacity. So since India has basically already created that capacity, Karan will basically discuss further how basically the balance sheets are very good in India that allows Indian players to put large capacities compared to basically or unlike European players. And last, as we discussed, India is becoming a very attractive location for basically this OEM, since India is very large part of their order books, and India is also basically becoming a very low engineering cost geography, which allows them to basically set up this supply chain in India.